The world of a transmitter engineer, either radio or TV. Eventually, Bill Ragsdale, aka Willie the Weatherman, became a DdToWl transmitter engineer. It was the transmitter engineer who sat with the radio or TV station transmitter when it was on the air. This engineer also had to baby the system to somehow keep it on the air, or get it back on as soon as possible, whenever something like equipment failure or a lightning strike occurred. The DdToWl transmitter seemed far out in the country. The land had been cleared of trees, and there were several radio towers on the site. The towers each held an antenna and helped form an extensive antenna farm. The antennas could be switched on or off under control of a console in the transmitter shack. This allowed modification of the propagation pattern, the shape and extent of the transmitted signal. Controlling the pattern lessened the chances of interference with more distant stations. DdToWl was mostly known as an AM amplitude modulation station. However, the station also included an FM frequency modulation transmitter, and its antenna was situated on one of the AM towers. Transmitter Shack was an apt name for the rustic, utilitarian, outright junky-looking building that constituted the home of the radio transmitters. It was, of course, also the home of the transmitter engineer when he wasn't in the generator building. Having generators was an advantage in that the station might be kept on the air even when there was a major power failure. It was also possible to originate a program of music or voice from the transmitter shack if the studio in downtown Tallahassee ceased sending its audio information. However, generators were also necessary since it was too costly to extend AC power lines to the transmitter site. Nevertheless, unknown to most, Bill Ragsdale wrote about his experiences, though these writings have been hidden away for 40 years. This is what he said about the transmitter site. When I walked into the transmitter shack of radio station blank, I should have known what I was getting into. Just a small pang of doubt began to gnaw away when the chief engineer took me aside and said, "Remember, we like this place homey. If you have any intention of cleaning it up, you're fired." Homey, I soon discovered, translated to mean the most disreputable clutter imaginable. The transmitters, deployed like rows of soldiers at attention, dominated the building on either side. The walls were devoid of mortar in many places, leaving holes through which the wind whistled a melancholy tune, providing a tonic jet stream on a freezing day. Assorted vermin skittered playfully about the floor and danced a kind of continuing bacchanal. A multitude of industrious spiders spun webs of 100 years around the spare tubes and the furniture. A metal cot upon which many an engineer had reclined, greasy blue jeans and all, and on whose coverings the word filthy would have been utterly wasted, adorned a cozy corner. The attic bulged to bursting with every known variety of war-surplus electronic equipment. Heat was provided by a small electric wall unit. In cold weather, an enterprising employee could, with the aid of a blanket, build a miniature tent around himself and the heater and thereby postpone rigor mortis for a time. But despite these importunities, despite a raging trepidation, and with the chief engineer's words still lingering in my ears, I became a transmitter engineer. End of Ragsdale's remarks. At any rate, the first thing a transmitter engineer had to do on a cold, perhaps 13 degrees F, North Florida morning was to start the generators, the main and the backup. Starting meant twisting a crank and maybe getting your arm broken in the process. However, once the main generator was running, it was time to go to the transmitter shack and perform the rest of the daily tasks that hopefully would allow DdToWl to get on the air. There was a single door at one end of the shack, and my dad had told me to run through that door as fast as I could if he ever so instructed me. Directly to your right as you entered the door was the row of transmitter bays. That was the AM transmitter. The bays were enclosed areas, some like racks and others contained by wire screens, in which the guts of the AM transmitter resided. To the left, down toward the opposite end of the shack, was the lone rack that constituted the FM transmitter. Just slightly closer to the far end of the shack, and situated between the AM and FM transmitters, was the console. It was from this console that a program could be originated on the rare occasion when it might be necessary. However, it was also from the console that various parts of the transmitters and the propagation pattern could be controlled. One of the first things someone might do after getting the generator running in the morning was switch on the tube filament voltages. Before the high voltage could be applied, the tubes needed to be warmed up. Doing the process in reverse might end up sending a tube or two to that never-never land where tubes go when pulverized. However, transmitter repairs were made by scrounging parts from tons of surplus equipment, usually military, which had been purchased for that purpose. Part of the transmitter engineer's time might be spent in removing appropriate parts of that equipment, so that needed parts would ever be at the ready. It was a cheap way of getting components since the equipment had been purchased for pennies on the dollar. One day, when the ceiling could no longer support all that old equipment and actually fell in on an important visitor, equipment scrounging became a thing of the past at DdToWl.